Hello, friends. If you're curious about the movie Gridiron Gang, 2006, you're in the perfect place. Don't forget to give this video a quick like, it really helps us out. And if you're new here, hit subscribe to stay updated on all the latest movie deep dives. Let's jump right in. It starts in the concrete gray of a juvenile detention facility, where the clang of steel doors and the weight of wasted potential hang in the air like smog. You can feel the tension in the way kids glance over their shoulders, speak in half-sentences, and hide behind bravado. These aren't just troubled teens, they're survivors of a system that gave up on them long before they got their first scar. And into this broken world walks Sean Porter. Played with raw, grounded force by Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, Porter isn't just a probation officer. He's a man clinging to the hope that these kids can still become something more than statistics. He sees what others ignore, that behind every tough exterior is a story. Pain, rage, loneliness, and a spark. One that, if fanned just right, might still ignite into something real. Gridiron Gang is based on the true story of the Kilpatrick Mustangs, a football team formed within the walls of a Los Angeles Youth Correctional Center. But calling this a sports movie would be like calling a battlefield a playing field. Because this isn't just about the game, this is about what the game represents. Structure, brotherhood, redemption. It's about taking young men who've only known violence and giving them rules, strategy, and, most importantly, a reason to believe they can change. From the outset, the film pulses with urgency. We meet Willie Weathers, a gang-affiliated teen doing time for murder, and Kelvin Owens, a boy from a rival crew. Their hatred simmers beneath the surface, threatening to erupt at any moment. But what sets this story apart is the way it forces enemies into formation. A football team doesn't work if everyone's out for themselves. And that simple truth becomes the hardest lesson these boys have to learn. Porter, fed up with seeing the same kids return to lockup or end up dead, decides to try something radical. Build a team. Build trust. Make them face each other not with fists, but with discipline. He brings in assistant coach Malcolm Moore, played with quiet strength by Xzibit, and together they begin recruiting players from the inside. The first practices are chaos. Boys who've only ever survived by isolating themselves are now asked to pass, block, and defend one another. It's not just foreign, it's absurd. But slowly, something begins to shift. Not all at once. Not with some miraculous montage. This is a story that earns every inch of progress. You see it in the way Willie stops throwing punches and starts watching the ball. In the way Kelvin hesitates before clashing with his old enemies. In the sweat, the bruises, the torn-up field, and the shouted calls of encouragement that begin to sound less like noise and more like hope. The film's emotional backbone is its belief that people can change when given the right reasons. And more than that, when given someone who refuses to give up on them. Porter doesn't sugarcoat the truth. He pushes. He yells. He demands. But underneath that gruff exterior is a man haunted by failure. His mother dying in the hospital, his frustrations with a system that recycles trauma, and the guilt of not having saved enough of the kids that came before. Johnson delivers one of his most nuanced performances here, not with action hero bravado, but with wounded strength. There's a speech where he tells the team, "You do it my way, not because it's easier, but because it's right." And in that moment, you realize, he's not just talking to them. He's talking to himself. As the team begins to gel, they start to win. And with those wins come new challenges. Temptations. Doubts. The outside world doesn't pause just because they're trying to change. Former gang ties resurface. The threat of violence looms. There's a pivotal moment when Willie and Kelvin, once mortal enemies, finally confront the weight of their pasts. It doesn't happen in a dramatic locker room explosion, but in a quiet, aching scene that shows just how far they've come, and how close they still are to falling back. And then there's Junior Paleta, the team's powerhouse lineman, whose fierce loyalty is matched only by the deep sadness in his eyes. His arc is one of the film's most heartbreaking. You watch him go from wrecking walls to protecting teammates, and when tragedy hits close to home, his pain nearly undoes everything. The moment he collapses on the field, sobbing into the turf, is not just a breakdown, it's a breakthrough. The mask shatters, and what's left is a boy who just wanted someone to believe he could be more than muscle. The film doesn't shy away from the brutality of their world. Fights break out. Setbacks happen. Some kids relapse into violence. Not everyone makes it to the final whistle. But that's what makes the triumphs so powerful. Because they're never handed out, they're earned. Every yard gained on the field reflects a battle fought off of it. And when the Mustangs finally line up against a rival high school team, kids with real uniforms, coaches, support systems, the weight of what they're up against hits you like a linebacker. This isn't just a game. It's a war for dignity. The climax is more than just a football match. It's a showdown of identities. Who were they? Who are they now? And which version will win? There's a moment where Porter looks out over his team and realizes he's not just coaching kids. He's trying to undo years of damage, to rewrite endings that had already been carved in stone. And the emotion in that realization punches through the screen. What makes Gridiron Gang resonate so deeply is its refusal to romanticize its message. It doesn't pretend that football saves lives. It acknowledges that some of these boys may still fall. But it also insists, with defiance and grace, that giving them a reason to rise matters just as much. That a single season of purpose can mean the difference between a cell and a future.
The film is filled with scenes that stay with you. Like when the boys paint their own uniforms, no budget for real gear, turning a group of inmates into a real team with nothing more than markers and belief. Or the team's first touchdown, when no one cheers because they're too shocked it actually happened. Or the quiet moment when Willie visits his mother, and she tells him she's proud. Not because he scored, but because he changed. And just when you think the story has reached its peak, Langston, pulling double duty as writer and director, reminds you this is based on true events. Real kids, real stakes, real transformation. The final moments cut to actual footage of the Kilpatrick Mustangs, the original team that inspired the film. You see them in grainy video, running drills, embracing after games, standing shoulder to shoulder. And you understand, with clarity, that this wasn't just a screenplay. It was a mirror, a testimony. Gridiron Gang isn't here to preach. It doesn't offer easy solutions. But what it does offer is something rare, honesty. It shows how fragile change can be, how much it hurts to grow, and how sometimes all it takes to rewrite a life is a whistle, a line drawn in the dirt, and someone who dares to say, "You matter. Now prove it." It's raw, it's real, and every frame pulses with purpose. A film that doesn't just tell a story, it fights for it. Yard by yard, mistake by mistake, victory by victory, until by the end, you're not just watching the game. You're rooting for every second of it. The morning sun crawls across the cracked pavement outside Los Angeles' Kilpatrick Detention Center, casting long shadows over a world where time seems frozen. Inside, barbed wire fences and security cameras create a perimeter not just of steel, but of expectation, because no one here is expected to change. The halls are lined with teenagers hardened far beyond their years, boys wearing orange jumpsuits and thousand-yard stares. In their world, survival is instinct, not choice. And redemption? That's a luxury no one believes in anymore. This is where Sean Porter clocks in. Not as a guard, not as a cop, but as a probation officer with something gnawing at his gut, frustration. He walks those halls every day, clipboard in hand, watching the same cycle play out. Intake, temporary compliance, release, and then, more often than not, death. Porter doesn't have to imagine where these kids end up. He sees it in their files. In the funerals he attends, in the mugshots that stop getting updated. And that weight is building. Porter isn't a savior. He doesn't speak in platitudes, or try to win over the kids with kindness. He's tough, blunt, angry even. Not at the boys, but at the machine that chews them up. What gnaws at him most is that no matter how hard he works, no matter how many counseling sessions or check-ins he holds, nothing changes. One kid in particular pushes him to the edge. A young man recently released who ends up dead just days later, shot in the street like so many others. Porter stands at the head of his funeral, fists clenched, face still. Something inside him shifts. That night, in the glow of the detention center's flickering hallway lights, Porter makes a decision that feels both wild and inevitable. These kids don't respond to rules or lectures, but maybe they'll respond to purpose, to teamwork, to something physical, something real. And so he pitches an idea that's met with immediate skepticism: a football team. At first, the administration laughs him off. There's no budget, no equipment, no time, and more than that, no faith. The idea of organizing violent, rival gang members into a single unit feels suicidal. But Porter is relentless. He lays out a plan: structure, discipline, academic tracking, weekend practices, local high school matchups. If they can treat these kids like athletes, not criminals, maybe the kids will start to believe they're capable of more. Eventually, with grudging approval and an agreement to pilot the program, Porter gets the green light. But the real challenge is just beginning. He starts with recruitment. One by one, he approaches the inmates, many of whom are already caught in the web of gang politics. Rivalries run deep in Kilpatrick. The moment one boy signs up, another refuses just because of the color of his skin or the ink on his arm. But Porter pushes through the resistance. He convinces Kelvin Owens, a tall, fast, aggressive teen with a chip on his shoulder, to give it a shot. Then he reaches out to Willie Weathers, cool, quiet, and guarded. Willie comes from a lineage of gang affiliation. He's in for a murder that no one talks about, but everyone knows happened. Getting him on the field is like asking a bomb to play catch. They eye each other warily. Kelvin and Willie, two leaders from opposite sides of a war, forced to wear the same jersey. And just like that, the tension begins to simmer. Porter brings in Malcolm Moore, a former player turned counselor, to help run practices. Malcolm is calmer, less confrontational than Sean, and provides the kind of quiet stability that balances Porter's storm. The two begin laying the foundation: drills, rules, fitness, structure. But when the first practice begins, chaos explodes. Boys tackle too hard. Fights break out. Helmets are thrown. It becomes clear that they don't understand the game. Not really. Not the strategy, not the purpose. To them, it's just another version of the streets, and old habits return quickly. But Porter doesn't back down. He uses the chaos. He stops practice, forces the boys to run drills, push-ups until their muscles burn. And in those moments, you see the first flicker of something unexpected: respect. Not for Porter, but for the work, for the discipline, for the fact that, maybe for the first time in their lives, someone isn't giving up on them the moment things go sideways. Still, tensions continue to rise. Willie and Kelvin clash again and again, and it takes everything Porter has to stop it from boiling over. One afternoon, a fight erupts in the locker room. Bloody, violent. It nearly ends the entire program. Willie ends up in solitary. Kelvin walks out. But Porter doesn't let it go. He visits Willie, sits outside the locked cell door, and says something few of these kids ever hear. "You're better than this." The walls don't crumble. Willie doesn't suddenly transform. But a seed is planted meanwhile. Equipment is scarce. They train in worn-down sneakers. Practice with torn jerseys. Helmets arrive days before their first scrimmage. There's no field. They use the facility's yard, lined poorly with chalk and bordered by chain link. But none of that matters, because what begins to form, slowly, painstakingly, is something more powerful than gear or grass. A team. Junior Paleta becomes the team's rock. Big, fierce, and intimidating, he's the kind of kid most people avoid in hallways. But on the field, Porter sees leadership. He pushes Junior to step up, to protect his teammates, not just bulldoze through them. And Junior, reluctantly at first, begins to listen. His aggression becomes focused. And with that focus comes respect. On the other end, Donald Madlock, fast but volatile, struggles to contain his anger. He runs hot, explodes at every call. Porter benches him mid-practice. But instead of screaming, he pulls Donald aside. "You think you've got power? You've got none if you can't control it." It's not a lecture. It's a challenge. And Donald, for once, accepts it.
As the days turn into weeks, the Mustangs take shape. Practices become productive. Arguments turn into huddles. The boys learn to block, to pass, to protect one another. It's still rocky. Mistakes are made, tempers flare, but something undeniable is happening. They're beginning to trust each other. Just a little. Just enough. And then the game schedule is finalized. Their first match, A nearby high school team with real uniforms, cheerleaders, buses. Everything the Mustangs don't have. The night before, Porter gives a speech, not about winning, but about belonging. You step out onto that field, and for the first time, people will look at you and see more than what you were. They'll see who you are. Game day arrives. The team loads into a rickety bus, nerves high. As they roll toward the high school field, heads turn. The crowd doesn't quite know how to react. Inmates? In uniforms? Competing like equals? It's a spectacle. But for the boys, it's a battlefield. The first half is rough. They're outmatched. Sloppy. Scared. The opposing team scores quick. Taunts fly. Fumbles happen. Porter paces the sidelines, eyes sharp, voice firm. But he doesn't lose control. He pulls them in, reminds them of everything they've built. This ain't just about them. It's about us. You fight for every inch. Together. And in that second half, they begin to fight. Not perfectly. Not heroically. But honestly. Kelvin and Willie, once at each other's throats, connect for a pivotal pass. Junior blocks a tackle that leaves the crowd gasping. Donald outruns two defenders and scores their first touchdown. The stands go quiet. Even the opposing coach watches, unsure if what's happening is a fluke or the beginning of something real. They lose. But not completely. Not emotionally. Because for the first time, the Mustangs competed. And in the locker room, sweaty, bruised, and breathless, something shifts. They aren't just inmates anymore. They're teammates. They've tasted what it feels like to be more than forgotten boys behind steel bars. And they want more. Porter sees it in their eyes. This isn't just working. It's beginning. The bus ride back from their first game is quiet, not with defeat, but with the weight of something new. Heads lean against windows, jerseys cling with sweat, and for the first time, no one is posturing. No one's trying to prove anything. They've fought together. They've tasted something outside the bars and fences. It wasn't a win, not by the scoreboard. But inside, it felt like the first crack in a wall they never thought would break. Back at Kilpatrick, that sense of change doesn't come without resistance. Some of the boys are riding the high of belonging, of teamwork, while others feel the old instincts creeping back in. Porter watches carefully. He knows the danger of momentum, that it can carry you forward just as easily as it can push you off course. Kelvin, once a firebrand, has started to show signs of leadership. He's not just playing well, he's thinking beyond the field. He looks out for teammates, calls them out when they slack off, even talks to the younger ones who are still new to the yard. Willie, meanwhile, carries a different kind of burden. His connection to the gang world still lingers. He tries to pull away, to commit to the team, but the outside doesn't let go so easily. And then it happens. During a family visit, Willie learns that his cousin, who still runs with their old set, has been jumped. It's retaliation for Willie's betrayal, for choosing the team over the street. The news shakes him. He doesn't say much, but the next day at practice, something's different. His eyes are colder. His silence heavier. Porter notices. They talk, briefly. Porter doesn't ask for details. He simply reminds Willie of the choice he made, that playing for the Mustangs wasn't just about football. It was about life. About deciding which world he wanted to belong to. Willie nods, but says nothing. Meanwhile, the Mustangs continue to practice, to play, to evolve. Their next game is different. They score early. They hold their ground. They look like a real team. The crowd watching them begins to change too, from skeptical stares to quiet support. Other teams begin shaking hands after games. A reporter shows up. A school administrator asks questions. Suddenly, the spotlight grows brighter. But with that light comes pressure. The administration at Kilpatrick begins to question the long-term impact of the program. There are whispers of budgets being redirected, of supervision being increased. Some argue that it's too risky, too much responsibility given to boys who are still serving time for serious crimes. Porter, frustrated, fights back. If we don't give them a shot now, we're not just failing them, we're feeding the same cycle that brought them here. The tension off the field mirrors the tension within. One night, a fight breaks out in the facility. Two non-players, different gangs, same hatred. It threatens the entire football program. The administration considers shutting it down. Porter is summoned to a hearing. He pleads his case. Not with statistics, but with names. Faces. Stories. These kids didn't just change, he says. They started becoming who they were meant to be. The program stays. Barely. But the scare leaves a mark. Practices get tighter. The boys feel the pressure mounting. Every mistake now feels like a potential end. Then comes the rematch. The Mustangs are set to play a team they faced earlier in the season, one that beat them badly. It's more than just a game now. It's personal. It's redemption. And it's risky. Porter knows that tempers will flare, that old wounds may reopen. In the days leading up to the game, he talks to each player, checks in, listens. He doesn't give speeches, he gives presence. He lets them know they're not alone. But just before the team departs, everything threatens to unravel. Willie is caught in a confrontation with a new inmate, a known affiliate from his old gang. The argument escalates. Words are thrown. Threats. But somehow, Willie walks away. For the first time, he chooses not to fight. Not because he's scared. Because the game is brutal. Hard hits. Tight plays. The opposing team is strong, fast, confident. But the Mustangs have something more. They have trust. Every snap, every block, every run is done with purpose. With unity. Then, the turning point. With seconds left, down by a score, Porter calls a risky play. A long pass, Kelvin to Willie. Everyone's watching. The ball flies. Time seems to slow. Willie catches it. Touchdown. The Mustangs erupt. The crowd, families, coaches, even guards, cheers with a kind of stunned joy. It's not just a victory. It's proof that this worked, that these boys could do more than anyone ever believed they could. In the locker room, celebration turns quiet. Porter gathers them, looks around. There's pride in his eyes. You earned this, he says. Not because you won, but because you became a team. And teams don't give up on each other. Later, one by one, the boys begin to talk about what comes next. Some want to try for school programs. Others ask about training in the off-season. There's talk of futures, real ones. Willie writes a letter to his cousin, apologizing for the past, promising to stay on the path he's chosen. Kelvin begins tutoring others inside the facility. Junior starts helping new players on the team. Donald asks Porter how to apply for work study when he gets out. And that choice saves everything.
They aren't perfect. They still struggle. But they've changed. The film closes not with a grand awards ceremony, not with confetti or college scouts. It ends with a quiet scene, Porter alone on the field, long after practice. He walks the sidelines, watching the empty yard. A ghost of a whistle in the wind. And then a voice from behind. "Coach, it's Willie. In street clothes. Released. Smiling. I came back to say thank you." Porter doesn't say much. He just nods. They stand there, side by side, looking out over the field where everything started. Because Gridiron Gang isn't a story about football. It's a story about choices. About fight. About finding something worth believing in. And someone who refuses to stop believing in you. Even when the whole world already has. Sean Porter walks through the halls of Kilpatrick like a man carrying too many ghosts. Not the kind that whisper in the dark or vanish in mirrors, but the kind that wear names and faces. Kids he tried to help, kids who didn't make it. You can see them in the way his jaw sets when he talks, in the way he keeps moving even when no one's following. He isn't a hero in shining armor. He's tired, frustrated, haunted by the feeling that no matter how hard he works, the world keeps falling through his fingers. But that's what makes Shawn Porter real. He doesn't fight because he thinks he can save them all. He fights because not trying has become unbearable. What sets Porter apart from the dozens of adult authority figures who pass through stories like this is that he doesn't stand above the boys. He stands with them. Yes, he's older, wiser, stronger. Yes, he has rules. Yes, he yells. But every push he gives is grounded in something these kids have rarely been offered: belief. He sees potential in them before they're ready to see it in themselves. And that, in a place like Kilpatrick, is revolutionary. He doesn't demand respect to feel powerful. He earns it by showing up, again and again, even when it would be easier to walk away. He's layered, too, never one note. He's hard on the boys not because he wants to break them down, but because he knows that softness without structure won't last. But behind the drill sergeant bark is a man grieving the violence that keeps stealing his kids. The way he breaks down after the funeral of a former inmate is devastating, not because he weeps, but because he doesn't. He just stands there, fists clenched, eyes dry, and in that moment, that his heart is screaming. Opposite him is Malcolm Moore, the assistant coach who balances the heat with quiet, steady calm. Malcolm is the voice of reason, the gentle touch, the one who reads between the lines while Shawn pushes against them. Where Shawn sees fire that needs molding, Malcolm sees trauma that needs healing. His role may seem smaller, but it's vital. He offers the kind of patient, consistent support that builds a foundation under the storm. He listens. He watches. And when he speaks, it matters. And then, there's Willie Weathers, the heartbeat of the team and the soul of the film. Willie is the boy with the guarded eyes, the measured voice, the weight of a murder charge stitched into every step he takes. He doesn't puff his chest or pick fights to prove anything. He simply exists, half here, half somewhere else. But beneath that cool demeanor is a boy carrying pain, confusion, and a desperate need to matter. Willie's journey isn't a straight line. He doesn't throw himself into the team. He resists. He questions. He withdraws. But every time he shows up, something breaks open. The first time he touches the ball in practice, it's not just a play, it's a moment of possibility. The first time he chooses to walk away from a fight, it's not weakness, it's growth. And when he finally forgives himself for his past, it's not a single moment. It's 1,000 small choices that build to something human. What makes Willie unforgettable is his quiet strength. He isn't loud. He isn't flashy. But he is relentless. He keeps trying, even when it hurts. Even when his past pulls at him like a current. And that's what makes his final moments with Porter, when he returns after release, not just emotional, but earned. He doesn't come back as a student. He comes back as a man. Changed. Grateful. Alive. Kelvin Owens, Willie's one-time enemy and eventual teammate, is a different kind of fire. Hot-tempered, sharp-tongued, impulsive. He walks with the weight of gang colors and the kind of fury that comes from growing up in a world that tells you anger is the only way to survive. At first, Kelvin is pure resistance, clashing with everyone, including Porter. But that friction is where his story starts. The rivalry between Kelvin and Willie is more than personal. It's symbolic. It represents years of bloodshed, of neighborhoods torn by loyalty and loss. To see them line up together on the field, passing the ball, trusting each other, is to see a bridge built over fire. Kelvin's shift doesn't happen all at once, but when it does, it's beautiful. He doesn't become soft. He becomes focused, responsible, a leader in his own right. And his evolution reminds us that anger, when directed with purpose, can become something powerful. Then there's Junior Paleta, the team's immovable force. Big, strong, full of fury. Junior is the kind of kid who looks like he was born to knock people down. But behind that imposing frame is someone who just wants to belong. You see it in his eyes, the way they flicker with uncertainty every time someone praises him. He doesn't trust it. Doesn't know how. He's been told for so long that he's dangerous, he's begun to believe it. But the team gives him something else. A role, a purpose, a place where his strength isn't feared, it's needed. Porter challenges him not just to hit harder, but to protect, to lead, to step up not as a weapon, but as a shield. And when Junior begins to rise, it's not loud or dramatic, it's quiet. Steady. One play at a time. One teammate at a time. There's a scene where Junior comforts a younger player who's struggling with drills. It's just a few words, barely heard. But it's everything. The mountain becomes a mentor. And it shows that change doesn't always come with fanfare. Sometimes it's a whisper, a gesture, a choice. And Yorker did. One take, particularly emotional, was never planned. It involved Willie breaking down alone after a win. The script called for him to smile, to celebrate. But Yorker, caught in the moment, crumbled instead. Tears fell. He whispered, "I never thought I'd feel this," unscripted. The crew stood silent. No one moved. Joanou left the cameras rolling. That footage was used in the final cut. The role of Junior Paleta, played by Sir Tace, had its own set of oddities. Tace, a high school athlete himself, suffered a minor ankle injury during filming, but it ended up aligning perfectly with a scripted injury Junior faces in the film. Instead of rewriting scenes, the director leaned into it, using Tace's real limp to deepen the authenticity. In interviews, Tace joked, "That ankle gave me more truth than any line of dialogue." Even Dwayne Johnson wasn't immune to the strange energy on set. Known for his confidence and control, Johnson found himself deeply moved during a scene in which the team comes together for the first time. After the take, he sat alone on the bleachers for almost 20 minutes. "It was like I was remembering a life I never lived," he said later. "Like I'd been part of something real." Outside the set, locals began visiting. Former guards, coaches, families of former players. Some brought photographs. Others brought silence. One afternoon, a woman stood at the gate with a framed picture of her son, one of the original Mustangs. She didn't speak to anyone. She simply placed the frame down at the edge of the field and walked away. No one touched it until the shoot wrapped. And then came the storm. Literally. During one of the final days of filming, a climactic game scene, a freak weather pattern swept through the area. Winds picked up. Skies darkened. Rain began to fall sideways. Equipment was rushed under tarps. Schedules were thrown off. But in that chaos, something strange happened. The boys, actors, former players, background extras, kept going. They huddled in the rain, calling out plays. The cameras rolled. Joanou let it happen. What was supposed to be a controlled, sunny game turned into a thunder-laced battle of mud and spirit. And somehow it was perfect. That scene, untouched by artificial light or clever editing, became one of the most powerful in the film. You can see the rain streaking down faces, the mud caking cleats, the breath in the cold air. And you can feel it, that this wasn't just performance. It was remembrance. A nod to the boys who fought, who changed, who lost and won not just on the field, but in their lives. Gridiron Gang may be a movie, but its creation was a mosaic of truth, fiction, coincidence, and heart. Every strange moment, every unexpected turn, wove something deeper into the fabric of the story. It wasn't just filmed. It was lived. And that's what made it unforgettable. There are stories that demand attention through spectacle, and then there are those that move quietly, pulsing with sincerity and anchored in truth. Gridiron Gang belongs to the latter. It doesn't shout its message. It breathes it, one scene at a time, with a kind of emotional honesty that critics couldn't ignore. The film didn't try to dazzle. It tried to reach, and in doing so, it found a rare balance between grit and grace. From the opening moments in Kilpatrick Detention Center to the final shots of the Mustangs walking off the field, Gridiron Gang draws its strength not from glory, but from struggle. And it's within that struggle that the film cements its place in critical discourse. One of the most pivotal events, both narratively and thematically, is the formation of the team itself. On paper, it's the classic setup, a group of broken boys pulled together to do something meaningful. But critics quickly realized this wasn't just about football. The actual event of forming the team, of pitching the idea to a skeptical administration, of gathering rivals and enemies, and placing them on the same field. It wasn't a trope. It was a test of belief, of commitment, and most of all, of what systems we trust to rehabilitate those society has already written off. The football team becomes more than a metaphor. It becomes a mirror. And that's what many reviewers pointed out with pointed admiration. The way the film used a simple sport as a gateway to far deeper conversations. What does it mean to be seen as more than your worst mistake? What does it take to change when everyone expects you to fail? These questions are alive in every scene, most especially in the hard, early days of training, where structure must be built from chaos. The critics who lauded the film didn't do so blindly. They acknowledged its genre trappings, the underdog sports formula, the moments of inspirational music swells, But what they celebrated was the film's ability to subvert those expectations. There's a reason the first touchdown doesn't feel triumphant. It feels uncertain. Even the boys themselves look shocked. The audience feels the victory, but not because the play was perfect. It's because for a split second, these boys believed they could be more than their pasts. A crucial moment that received particular attention was the confrontation between Willie Weathers and Kelvin Owens. Critics dissected this not as a plot point, but as a pivotal reckoning with identity. Two boys from different gangs, molded by hatred and history, are forced to play side by side. And the moment they begin to trust each other, the film hits something transcendent. Critics saw in this not just character development, but a radical reimagining of what community could be when forged through understanding instead of violence. In one New York-based review, a line stood out. Gridiron Gang doesn't ask us to cheer because they win. It asks us to notice that they tried. That sentiment captures the heart of the film. Every significant event, the locker room fights, the halting practices, the moments of failure, isn't a detour from the story. It's the story. Each setback is a step towards something real. When Donald Madlock loses control on the field and is benched, the easy path would be redemption through a big play. But the film resists that simplicity. His growth happens in the background, in smaller choices, showing up early, listening, staying in line. That subtlety earned praise from critics who were tired of exaggerated arcs equally powerful, is the subplot involving Junior Paleta. When Junior breaks down after learning of his brother's death, the moment could have been a typical grief beat. But the film holds on him. Just a long, steady shot of a boy too big to cry, sobbing into the grass. It's raw, and critics noticed. They pointed out that this was the film's way of stripping away armor. Junior isn't just muscle. He's heart. And that heart breaks on camera, without a single word of dialogue. That's not performance, that's presence. Porter's speeches, particularly the one delivered before the team's biggest game, were also widely discussed. Critics were quick to note that these weren't your average rah-rah coach monologues. They weren't written to inspire audiences in the theater. They were written to reach the boys in the story. There's a moment where Porter says, "You are not your past. You are not your sentence. You are what you do next." It landed. Not because it was profound, but because it was real. It spoke to the truth of rehabilitation, of second chances, of the fact that some kids never get to hear those words until it's already too late. Donald Madlock is another standout. A ball of raw energy, quick feet, and a temper that nearly burns him out. He's electric on the field, but volatile off it. His arc is about control, learning that speed without discipline is chaos. That emotion without direction is self-destruction. And watching him learn that balance, with Porter's steady hand and Malcolm's quiet guidance, is one of the film's most satisfying threads. Every boy on the Mustangs carries his own weight. Each one adds a thread to the tapestry of the team. The kid who's never had a family. The one who hides his fear behind jokes. The one who doesn't speak unless spoken to. They aren't background noise. They're fragments of a larger story. Pieces of a broken system trying to heal itself. One pass, one play, one handshake at a time. But Gridiron Gang doesn't stop with the kids. Even the adults around them are given dimension. The wardens, the guards, the skeptical administrators. They're not painted as villains. They're painted as tired people, bound by rules, wary of hope. But as the boys begin to change, so do they. And that's part of the film's magic. It reminds us that transformation doesn't only belong to the young. Every character in Gridiron Gang matters, because every one of them carries truth, pain, potential, and the film treats them with respect. Not by romanticizing them, but by letting them stumble, struggle, and rise. It doesn't promise perfect endings. It doesn't tie things up with ribbons. But it shows us that character isn't built by talent alone. It's built in the hard places, in the choices no one sees, in the quiet courage of boys who decide to fight for something more than survival. And that fight, in the end, is what defines them. Not their crimes, not their records, not their pasts, but the grit, the grace, and the unshakable bond of a team that chose to believe, together. Some films arrive with fireworks, big budgets, bold effects, larger-than-life sets. Others, like Gridiron Gang, sneak in quieter, grounded in reality. But once you're inside their world, something strange begins to happen. Not strange in the spooky sense. Strange in the way real-life stories sometimes echo louder than fiction. In the way truth becomes more haunting than anything a screenwriter could invent. The making of Gridiron Gang wasn't just a film production. It was an experience riddled with moments that blurred the line between performance and reality, between actors and the people they were portraying, between the story they were telling and the lives still unfolding in its shadow. One of the first strange facts about the film has to do with the very heart of the story, Kilpatrick Detention Center. While most productions build replicas or composite locations for filming, director Joanou wanted authenticity, not just in spirit, but in environment. So, the crew was granted rare access to film inside the actual facility where the real Kilpatrick Mustangs had taken the field years before. The moment cast and crew stepped inside, the tone changed. The silence wasn't cinematic, it was lived in. Hallways still echoed with the tension of what had once been. The field, still intact, bore the imprint of cleats that had long since walked away. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, stepping into the role of Sean Porter, admitted later that filming in the actual facility shook him more than any stunt or action sequence he'd done before. One afternoon, while rehearsing a monologue in an empty cell block, he was interrupted by a guard who casually said, "That's the cell Porter pulled a kid out of after he got jumped." It wasn't part of the script, just a piece of truth, but it shifted the performance. Johnson carried that weight in every scene afterward, grounding his portrayal in the knowledge that this wasn't just a story, it was somebody's yesterday. And speaking of Sean Porter, he was on set. Not just as a consultant, but as a presence. Watching. Guiding. Sometimes stepping in between takes to remind the actors. That's not how it went. Or, he didn't say it like that. He looked away first. It was eerie, at times, seeing the real man standing beside the actor portraying him. More than once, crew members said they forgot who was who. At one point during filming a team huddle scene, Porter, without warning, stepped into the middle of the circle during a rehearsal and gave the original speech he'd once given his team years ago. The actors, frozen, watched in silence. No one called cut. No one dared. That take was later recreated almost word for word for the final cut. There were other echoes of the past that refused to stay quiet. Many of the extras in the film weren't traditional background actors. They were former inmates from Kilpatrick. Young men who had once walked those halls for real, now standing just out of frame, watching a story they had lived be told through lights and cameras. One man, cast to play a rival player, broke down after a scene. "That was me," he whispered, eyes distant. "That was me 10 years ago." The production crew didn't expect how hard it would hit. Cinematographer Jeff Cutter shared in interviews that capturing certain shots felt voyeuristic, too intimate, too close to real pain. During a scene where Dwayne Johnson's Porter confronts a student about choosing between the streets and the team, Cutter found himself unable to speak after the take. "It wasn't acting," he said. "Not in that moment. It was something else." But even amidst the heaviness, the strange and the surreal, there were moments of levity, unexpected, absurd, and unforgettable. One recurring mystery on set involved the scoreboard at the Kilpatrick field. A simple electronic board, functional during early shoots, began displaying the number 13 repeatedly. Regardless of the play, the score would reset to 13-13. The crew chalked it up to a short circuit, but the maintenance team swore the wiring had been redone. Days went by. Same score. 13-13. Eventually, the board was replaced, but the original now sits in a backlit storage unit, where crew members jokingly call it the haunted score. Then there was the issue with the uniforms. The production team had custom jerseys printed, replicas of the original Mustangs gear. But when the real former players saw them, something was off. Not in the colors or names, but in the wear. "They look too new," one man said. So the costume department, under the guidance of the former team, scuffed, stained, and restitched every jersey by hand. One actor even slept in his for a week, refusing to let it be cleaned. "If I'm going to be him," he said, "I need to feel it." Perhaps one of the strangest coincidences came from the casting of Willie Weathers, played by Jade Yorker. While researching his role, Yorker discovered that the real-life inspiration for Willie had, years earlier, grown up just 2 neighborhoods away from Yorker's own childhood home. The two had unknowingly attended the same community center, years apart. When they finally met during production, the conversation was brief, but impactful. "You're telling my story," the real Willie said. "So make it count." And that's where Gridiron Gang hit hardest in critical circles. Its unwavering focus on the systems that fail youth long before they end up behind bars. The film doesn't moralize. It doesn't preach. But it shows the bureaucracy, the skepticism, the institutional fatigue. When Porter fights for the team to exist, He's not just arguing for football. He's arguing against the machinery of indifference, against a culture that deems some people beyond saving. The emotional resonance of the film also came under close analysis. Critics highlighted how the film chooses intimacy over spectacle again and again. For every high-stakes play, there's a quiet character moment that lands harder. A look exchanged between teammates. A whispered apology. A decision to walk away from a fight. These moments, often unscored and simply lit, provided the emotional core that kept the film from becoming formulaic. They grounded the stakes in humanity rather than heroism. The real footage at the end, showing the actual Kilpatrick Mustangs, was described by many as the film's final and most powerful gut punch. After watching actors bleed and sweat and grow in their roles, suddenly seeing the real boys behind the story pulls the rug out in the best possible way. It's a reminder that this wasn't just narrative. It was memory. That some of those boys went on to live better lives. And that some did not. The ambiguity is intentional. It lingers. The critical reception wasn't universally glowing. No film about this kind of subject matter ever is. Some argued it leaned too heavily on sports drama tropes. Others wanted more insight into the deeper psychological journeys of the kids. But even the most hesitant reviews agreed on one thing. Gridiron Gang felt honest. It never asked for tears, it earned them. It didn't wrap things up in a tidy bow. The team didn't win every game. Every boy didn't walk out reformed. But what it did show was the cost of trying. And the cost of not trying. Audience reception mirrored much of the critical sentiment, though with even greater emotional weight. People wrote about how the film reminded them of their own sons, their own neighborhoods, their own lost friends. Teachers reached out, saying they saw their students in those boys. Former inmates shared their stories online, talking about how the film gave them language for what they had endured. Football coaches used the movie to teach their teams about brotherhood, responsibility, and belief. One audience member wrote, "I watched this with my son. We barely spoke during the film. But afterward, he hugged me and said, 'I don't want to be one of the forgotten ones.' That's not just impact. That's a pulse." In film studies courses, Gridiron Gang is often discussed alongside other redemption-centered narratives. Coach Carter, Freedom Writers, The Blind Side. But what separates it, many argue, is its refusal to center white saviorism or emotional manipulation. Sean Porter isn't glorified. He's tired. He's flawed. He loses his temper. He questions himself. And the kids, especially the kids, aren't reduced to props for his growth. They lead their own arcs. They challenge him. They change each other. From a filmmaking standpoint, critics also appreciated the restraint. No slick, overproduced glamour. Just handheld cameras, real locations, and a director who trusted the story enough to let it breathe. The pacing reflects this. The first half slow and uncertain, just like the boys. The second half tighter, more cohesive. A visual metaphor for the team finding its rhythm. In the end, Gridiron Gang didn't just tell a story. It took a stand. Against apathy. Against lost potential. Against the idea that some lives are worth less than others. And in doing so, it carved out its own place. Not just as a sports film, not just as a drama, but as a testimony. A reminder that real change is messy. That growth doesn't come with victory. It comes with effort. And that sometimes, the bravest thing anyone can do, is simply show up. Again and again. Even when no one else believes. There's something different about making a film that tells a true story. Especially when that story comes from a place as raw, as real, and as heartbreakingly hopeful as Gridiron Gang. From the first day of pre-production to the final wrap, there was a hum beneath everything. Not pressure, not nerves, something deeper. A sense that the weight of the story being told was bigger than any camera, any script, any director's vision. And maybe that's why the production process was unlike anything the cast and crew had experienced before. It wasn't just about getting the right shots. It was about doing right by the truth. Joanou, the film's director, didn't come in with illusions. He knew the responsibility on his shoulders, and he knew the shadow cast by the real-life Mustangs. Those young men from Kilpatrick who had defied expectation and rewritten their own fates, yard by yard. Joanou didn't want to make a movie about them. He wanted to honor them. And so, from day one, that became the compass for every decision on set. The first challenge was the setting. Finding a location that could reflect the look and feel of the Kilpatrick Juvenile Detention Center wasn't easy. But then, in a decision that would ultimately define the film's authenticity, production was granted access to shoot on location at the actual facility where the events had taken place. That meant the actors would be walking the same halls, stepping on the same worn concrete, and feeling the same air that the real boys once did. The moment they stepped inside, everything changed for Dwayne Johnson, who was still carving his path out of wrestling superstardom and into serious acting. This was a role unlike any other. As Sean Porter, he had to drop the persona, the charm, the larger-than-life swagger. He had to become someone who carried grief in his eyes, someone who had seen too much, who fought with everything he had not to save the world, but to save just a few. To prepare, Johnson met extensively with the real Sean Porter. They walked the halls together. They sat in offices Porter had once used. They watched game tapes of the Mustangs, boys who had once been inmates, now running across fields with fire and purpose in their eyes. That connection rooted Johnson's performance in something incredibly grounded. The crew recalled how, even between takes, he stayed in the space of Porter, not method acting in the theatrical sense, but remaining emotionally tuned in. One assistant director said, "He wasn't the Rock on set. He was Sean. He carried it all, the weight, the hope, the frustration. You could see it even when the cameras weren't rolling." But Johnson wasn't the only one who dove deep. The young cast portraying the Mustangs went through weeks of intensive physical and emotional training. Before they ever touched a football, they sat down with counselors, read transcripts from the original program, and heard stories from real former inmates. It wasn't enough to learn lines. They had to understand. They had to feel what it was like to grow up in a world that expected failure. To bring that physical authenticity to the screen, producers hired real coaches to train the cast. Practices were grueling. No stunt doubles for the football plays. Every hit, every sprint, every tumble on the field, it was real. The bruises, the exhaustion, the bonding between castmates, it all bled onto the screen. One actor joked, "By the time we started filming the first game, we weren't just a cast, we were a team." And sore as hell. Tace, who played Junior Paleta, took to his role with enormous heart. Towering and tough, he was the team's physical anchor. But behind the scenes, he was the one always cracking jokes, lightening the mood between emotionally charged scenes. Yet during one particularly intense moment on set, a scene involving the death of his character's brother, he asked for silence, stepped away, and returned with tears already falling. The crew stood still. The director called action, and what unfolded was a raw, staggering performance done in a single take. "You could hear the air shift," one cameraman said. "We weren't watching acting. We were watching truth." The film's football scenes were shot using a combination of handheld and long-lens cameras to keep the energy tight and immersive. Jeff Cutter, the cinematographer, described it like trying to shoot a documentary inside a war zone. "We wanted you to feel every snap, every hit," he said. "To make the audience understand this wasn't just a game, it was a war for identity." But it wasn't all heavy. In fact, the behind-the-scenes environment often danced between intensity and levity. Between emotional takes, the cast would toss balls, play pranks, and mock each other like real teammates. One recurring gag involved duct-taping water bottles to unsuspecting players' helmets during downtime. Dwayne Johnson himself wasn't immune. Once finding his chair had been swapped with a plastic folding stool with the word "retired" written across it in Sharpie. One of the crew's favorite memories was during the filming of the team's first touchdown. The energy was electric. The extras, many of whom were former Kilpatrick youth or local athletes, cheered with such force that they accidentally stormed the field before the take was done. Cameras kept rolling. The pure joy, the confusion, the unrehearsed chaos, it was perfect. Joanou kept it in the final cut. The music of the film, too, was carefully curated. The score, composed by Trevor Rabin, threaded emotion through the entire narrative without ever overwhelming it. But what many don't know is that during post-production, a different temp track was initially used, one that included old-school hip-hop and raw percussion. The shift to Robin's subtler score was a deliberate decision to avoid glorifying the violence or grit. "We didn't want to hype the moments," Joanou said. "We wanted to honor them." A lesser-known fact is that the film's final scene, where Willie Weathers returns to thank Sean Porter, wasn't originally scripted. The story was meant to end on the field, with the team walking off into their uncertain futures. But during shooting, the cast kept revisiting one question. What happens next? That question sparked a rewrite. The decision was made to bring Willie back, to show that the change had stuck, that the impact had rippled forward. The emotional resonance of that moment, Willie standing before the man who never gave up on him, was so profound, some crew members cried behind the monitors. There was one day on set that many called the real reunion. Unbeknownst to much of the cast, the producers had invited several of the original Mustangs to visit. When they walked onto the field, the energy shifted again. They weren't there for show. They weren't asked to pose or speak. They just watched. Quietly. And afterward, they met the actors who played them. Jade Yorker, who portrayed Willie, shared a long conversation with the real young man whose life inspired the character. He later said, "He told me I reminded him of who he wanted to be back then. And that hit me hard. Because I realized I wasn't just playing him. I was playing his hope." Even off the field, the lessons stuck. Several cast members went on to work with youth outreach programs after the film wrapped. Some returned to schools they once attended, now standing in front of classrooms to share their stories. One actor said, "This movie didn't just change how I act. It changed how I live." And that, perhaps, is the most remarkable fact about Gridiron Gang. It wasn't just a film about transformation. It became one. Through every story told, every practice run, every take retaken, through the rain that refused to stop during key scenes, through the laughter echoing in between drills, through the real boys who returned to their real field to watch a version of themselves be honored, not as criminals, but as fighters, as boys who had been counted out, and proved everybody wrong. It begins with chain-link fences, and the sound of distant yelling echoing through corridors lined in institutional grey. Concrete stretches, as far as the eye can see. No paintings on the walls, no colours to break the coldness. Just steel bars, worn floors, and silence that buzzes louder than noise. This is Kilpatrick Juvenile Detention Centre, the primary setting of Gridiron Gang, and it is not just where the story takes place. It is the story's heartbeat. The environment in this film is not passive. It breathes, it restrains, it looms. It watches the boys like an unblinking eye. And in every creak of its gates, every scuffed tile, every broken hoop or dust-coated corner, it tells us one thing. This is not a place built for dreams. It's built to hold the dreamless. The decision to film in the actual Kilpatrick facility wasn't just for authenticity. It was a storytelling choice that rippled through every frame of the movie. From the opening shot, when Dwayne Johnson's Sean Porter walks the hallways with authority and fatigue carved into his face, to the final moments on the dusty football field, you feel the gravity of that space. It presses on every scene. There is no faking the way light filters through prison windows, or the echo of a voice bouncing off cement walls. It is a space that shapes those within it. The film's interiors, its holding cells, corridors, classrooms, and recreation areas, are shot with an eye for realism over romance. Cinematographer Jeff Cutter rarely uses symmetrical framing. Instead, the camera floats just behind characters, like a silent observer unsure whether to hope or fear. The use of handheld shots heightens the immediacy. You're not watching something neat and rehearsed. You're witnessing something unfolding, breathing, trying not to fall apart. These spaces are cramped not just physically, but emotionally. The boys inside are close enough to touch, and yet worlds apart. Cutter's lens finds the distance in proximity, the isolation in togetherness. That dichotomy lingers throughout. Outside, the yards are barren. The landscape isn't bleak by accident. It's stripped, minimal, hostile in its emptiness. It gives the film a kind of emotional rawness. There's a hill in the background of one recurring shot, just beyond the fence line. It's always there, a quiet reminder that life exists beyond Kilpatrick's reach. But for the boys inside, that hill might as well be the moon. And then there's the field that becomes their sanctuary, their battleground, their proving ground. Dusty, cracked, marked only by chalk lines and cones. There's nothing glorious about it. No grandstands, no turf, no scoreboard that works half the time. But somehow it's sacred, because it's the one place where the boys can define themselves not by their records, but by their effort. The contrast between the grim uniformity of the detention center and the open sprawl of the field is deliberate. It is in this space that transformation begins, not because it is beautiful, but because it offers possibility. When the Mustangs step onto that dirt for the first time, the camera shifts. The angles widen. The sun breaks through the haze. There's movement, fluid, unrestrained, even when they stumble. The cinematography tells us what they don't know yet. That change is possible, even here. Color plays an understated, but powerful role in shaping mood. The early parts of the film are bathed in desaturated tones, grays, washed-out blues, the occasional flash of harsh institutional yellow. These colors suffocate. They flatten the world, drain it of vibrancy. But as the story progresses, as the team begins to form and the boys begin to change, the palette shifts. Warmth begins to creep in, not in big, obvious ways, but in hints. The orange of the practice jerseys. The sun hitting their skin. The red hue in the dirt after a long game. These colors aren't just visual, they're symbolic. Life is returning. Lighting is another subtle storytelling tool. Inside the detention center, lighting is harsh and overhead, exposing sterile. It casts long shadows beneath the boys' eyes, emphasizing the weight they carry. But outside, particularly on the field, natural light is used generously. Golden hour shots become frequent as the team bonds. There's a warmth, a softness, that begins to wrap around the story, offering contrast to the coldness of confinement. And yet, the lighting never becomes romanticized. The sun never blinds. The warmth never overpowers the grit. Joanou and Cutter use framing to communicate relationships long before words do. Early in the film, boys are often shot in isolation, even in groups. The frame might include multiple bodies, but each is boxed in by walls, beds, or shadows. It gives the sense that even among others, they're alone. But as the team forms, those frames begin to shift. The boys are shown together, in huddles, in motion. Their bodies begin to share the space rather than compete within it. It's a quiet visual metaphor for unity. Sound design enhances the world just as vividly. Within the facility, sound is oppressive. Buzzers, footsteps, keys jangling, cell doors clanking shut. These mechanical sounds create a rhythm of control. You hear the routine, the surveillance, the hierarchy. But on the field, those sounds fall away. The rhythm changes. We hear breathing, the crunch of cleats on dirt, the grunt of contact. The football scenes don't just look real, they feel real. There's no cinematic gloss. No overproduced soundscapes. Just impact. Sweat. Movement. Life. The use of slow motion is reserved, but when it appears, it's earned. Not during victories, but during turning points. A ball spiraling through the air as Willie breaks free. A tackle that isn't just physical, but emotional. A boy choosing to protect rather than destroy. These slowed moments highlight not triumph, but transformation. The film doesn't glorify action. It slows down when it wants us to feel what the characters are feeling. Another brilliant technique is the contrast between enclosed and open spaces. Early on, scenes are tight, hallways, cells, small offices. Even the meetings with the administration are cramped, full of walls. But as the team gains momentum, the geography opens. The field expands. Practices become more dynamic. Eventually, the team travels to away games, and suddenly we're in wide stadiums, open bleachers, places with spectators and noise. These new settings feel overwhelming at first, like the outside world isn't quite ready for them. And that's the point. The boys are learning to exist beyond confinement. There's a moment in one of the later games where the camera cuts to the crowd, parents, community members, rival students. It's not a long shot, but it lands hard, because you realize this is the first time the Mustangs are truly being seen by the world. Not as inmates, not as delinquents, but as athletes, teammates. And it's in that quiet revelation that the setting transcends the story. The field is no longer part of the facility. It becomes its own world, a place where the past doesn't dictate the future. Even costume design plays into this thematic framework. The boys begin in uniform jumpsuits, orange, anonymous, identical. But as they form a team, they get jerseys. Not sleek, expensive uniforms, but stitched together fabrics painted by hand. They aren't perfect, but they're theirs. They carry their names. They represent effort. That shift in clothing reflects a shift in identity. From inmate to individual. From number to name. In contrast, the other teams they play against wear pristine, color-coordinated uniforms. Their schools are clean, bright, filled with parents and snack bars. The difference is stark. But it's not used to invite pity. It's used to highlight resilience. The Mustangs don't need polish. They need opportunity. And the setting constantly reinforces that contrast, that sense of being outsiders fighting their way in the final setting, though, is the one that leaves the deepest mark, the locker room. Not glamorous, not large, but sacred. It's the space where the boys argue, bond, cry, and prepare. The camera often lingers in that room longer than expected. The sounds of cleats clacking on tile. The rustling of jerseys. The heavy silence before a game. It's in these moments that we see who they are, not just as a team, but as individuals trying to hold on to the version of themselves that's beginning to emerge. And when the final game ends, and the team walks off the field, the camera doesn't linger on the scoreboard. It doesn't pan to the cheering fans. It holds on the boys, tired, bruised, but upright. Victorious, not because of the points scored, but because of the ground covered. In many ways, Gridiron Gang is a masterclass in using setting and cinematic language, not just to enhance a story, but to tell it. The walls of Kilpatrick aren't just scenery, they are characters. The field isn't just a location, it's a transformation. And every frame, every shot, every sound is chosen with care, with reverence for the truth behind the fiction. Because in the end, this is a story not about where the boys are, but about where they could be. There was one moment in particular that the editors initially planned to shorten. A scene of the team sitting quietly in the locker room after a loss. No words, just breathing. Some heads down, others looking up at nothing. It lasted over a minute, an eternity in studio terms. But Joanou kept it. This is the cost, he said. The cost of hope. The cost of failure. We need to sit in it. And they did. Even the final frame, Willie returning after his release to thank Sean Porter, was debated in the editing room. Some thought ending on the field would be stronger, cleaner. But Joanou insisted. It doesn't end on the field. It ends in the heart. And when that scene plays, quiet and powerful, there's no doubt he was right. Behind the camera, Gridiron Gang was a film built on collaboration. Crew members spoke often of how unusually tight the team became. There was no us and them. No separation between actors and techs. Everyone worked together. Everyone showed up for each other. At the wrap party, held on a makeshift field next to the detention center, someone brought a whistle. The cast formed two lines. And, in street clothes and sneakers, they played one last scrimmage. Cameras off. No audience. Just one last game, full of laughter, trash talk, and real brotherhood. That night, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Dwayne Johnson gave a toast. Not rehearsed. Not pre-written. Just from the heart. This film isn't about football, he said. It's about choosing to be better when nobody expects you to be. And we did that. All of us. And they did. Not just in the scenes we saw, but in the spaces between. In the jokes shared behind the camera . In the silent hugs after emotional takes . In the muddy jerseys and waterlogged cleats . In the moments when truth became performance. And then circled back to truth again. Gridiron Gang wasn't just a film set. It was a team. The story of Gridiron Gang begins in silence. Not the kind that brings peace, but the kind that echoes through concrete hallways and behind steel bars. It's the silence of hopelessness, of futures forgotten before they've even begun. From that very first shot, the low-lit corridors of Kilpatrick Juvenile Detention Center, there is something heavy lingering in the air, something unspoken. And that weight is what drives the film's deepest theme, the fight for redemption. Redemption in Gridiron Gang doesn't come in grand declarations or sweeping transformations. It comes in fragments. A boy stepping away from a fight he would have thrown himself into a week earlier. A pass caught cleanly in the dirt by hands that once held weapons. A name shouted in celebration instead of in accusation. The film tells us, over and over, that change is not a miracle. It is a decision, one made repeatedly, through resistance and relapse. And that journey is what the film respects above all else. But woven within that central theme are threads that tie every scene, every frame, every moment together. Identity, belonging, second chances, control, and the power of mentorship. And each of these is expressed not just through dialogue or plot, but through carefully placed symbols and emotional echoes that reflect the souls of the characters. One of the most visible and emotionally potent themes is the reclaiming of identity. From the beginning, the boys are reduced to numbers, files, and charges. Their names are barely remembered. They're identified by crimes, by gang affiliations, by how long they'll be locked up. The film confronts this dehumanization directly, showing us that identity, when stripped down to labels, becomes a prison more binding than any cell. And then comes the jersey. It's not just clothing. It's not just a uniform. The moment the boys paint their team numbers and names across their backs, they are no longer just inmates. They are teammates. Individuals. Members of something built with purpose. The jersey becomes a symbol of ownership. Of choice. Of saying, this is who I choose to be today. It's a rejection of the names they were given on the streets, and a declaration of the names they are building for themselves. That idea of reclamation extends into the theme of belonging. Many of these boys come from fractured families, broken communities, systems that failed them long before their first arrest. The gang becomes a substitute for connection, a dangerous brotherhood built on survival instead of love. The football team becomes the first space where belonging isn't tied to violence or fear. It's not automatic. They have to earn it, practice after grueling practice. But once they're in, they are in. And the field becomes the ground where that connection grows. The football field in Gridiron Gang is arguably the film's most important symbol. Barren, dusty, imperfect, it mirrors the boys who play on it. But it's also sacred. It is the only place in their world where their pasts don't matter, where their mistakes don't follow them. It's where they fall, get up, and fall again. And it's where they learn that brotherhood isn't just about blood or turf. It's about trust. Trust is its own theme, quietly laced through every interaction. At first, no one trusts anyone. Not Sean Porter. Not the system. Not each other. Willie Weathers doesn't trust Kelvin Owens. Kelvin doesn't trust the program. Even the coaches struggle to trust that these boys are ready to change. But that trust builds in layers. In glances. In blocked tackles and pass balls. In words spoken between bruised ribs and breathless lungs. It's slow. Earned. And all the more powerful because of it. But the film doesn't just hand out redemption and trust freely. It also explores control, the illusion of it, the hunger for it, and the damage done when it's used as a weapon. Sean Porter is not without flaws. His desperation to change the lives of these boys teeters on obsession. He pushes them hard, sometimes too hard. And that tension creates some of the most emotionally complex moments in the film. Because Porter, like the boys he mentors, is wrestling with his own trauma. He's haunted by the ones he couldn't save. And the football team becomes his own version of a second chance. Porter's journey is deeply tied to another symbolic thread, the whistle. Simple. Small. But in this story, it means everything. When Porter blows that whistle, he demands attention. Respect. Structure. But it's also a symbol of his hope. A hope that maybe, just maybe, discipline can lead to freedom. That sound becomes an anchor. A rhythm. A heartbeat that brings chaos into order. And by the end of the film, the whistle is not just his tool, it's the team's guide. Another recurring visual motif is the use of barriers. Gates, fences, locked doors. These are physical representations of the emotional walls the boys have built. But gradually, the film shifts. Those same fences that once represented entrapment begin to take on new meaning. The fence surrounding the field becomes the line between the life they're fighting for and the one they're leaving behind. When Willie stares through the chain link after a tough loss, it's not about confinement, it's about distance. About how close freedom feels, and how hard it is to reach. And the setting shows us the path. One step, 1 yard, 1 breath at a time. It's one thing to shoot a film with grit. It's another to live it while the cameras roll. That's what the crew of Gridiron Gang discovered early on. This wasn't going to be just another inspirational sports movie. This was a story rooted in truth, scarred by pain, and lifted by possibility. It demanded more than performance. It demanded immersion. From the very first day of shooting, something intangible hung in the air. Maybe it was the weight of the real-life events the film was based on, or maybe it was the location itself. But everyone, from the top-billed stars to the newest production assistants, felt it. Filming at the actual Camp Kilpatrick Juvenile Detention Center wasn't just a decision for authenticity. It was a decision that shaped the soul of the movie. The facility, with its cold walls, echoing corridors, and fenced-in yards, wasn't a set built to look real. It was real. And walking through those gates each morning reminded everyone that they were stepping into someone else's story. Sean Porter's story. The Mustangs' story. And the story of every kid who had passed through those walls with bruises on their knuckles and hope slipping through their fingers. One of the most powerful behind-the-scenes moments came early in the shoot, when the real Sean Porter visited the set. There was no fanfare. No announcement. He simply walked onto the field while the crew was blocking a scene. For a moment, no one noticed. Then Dwayne Johnson, already dressed in character as Porter, locked eyes with the man he was portraying. The two stood across the field from each other, mirror images separated by time. Johnson walked up. Porter extended a hand. Neither said much, but that handshake lasted longer than most. A few minutes later, when the scene rolled, Johnson's delivery was sharper, steadier, and unmistakably infused with something new, reverence. And it wasn't just Johnson. The younger cast members, many of whom were playing characters inspired by real former inmates, took the task seriously. Before filming began, the actors were introduced to former members of the Kilpatrick Mustangs. They heard their stories, not as press soundbites, but as memories. One actor remembered a former Mustang saying, "This team saved my life. Don't just play me, feel me." That line stuck. During rehearsals, during blocking, Even during casual lunch breaks, the actors stayed close. Not because they had to, but because they needed to. The production didn't take shortcuts when it came to training. The actors portraying the Mustangs went through Real football camp. 2 days. Conditioning. Drills under the scorching sun. No one got special treatment. It was grueling, but it worked. By the time the cameras started rolling, the team moved like a unit. They had call signs. Inside jokes. Bruises that didn't come from makeup. They weren't pretending to be teammates. They were teammates. Of course, not every moment was heavy. In fact, some of the most memorable stories from set involved laughter when it was least expected. Dwayne Johnson, known for his imposing screen presence, became the designated prankster on set. During one intense scene involving a locker room pep talk, he walked in with a serious look on his face, only to reveal he was wearing a wig from a different production. No one broke faster than Xzibit, who played assistant coach Malcolm Moore. Johnson looked him dead in the eye and said, "You ready to run these drills or what, cousin?" Filming had to pause for 10 minutes, because no one could stop laughing. Xzibit, in turn, kept the atmosphere light when the emotional weight became too heavy. Between takes of particularly tough scenes, especially those involving group confrontations or heartbreaking confessions, he'd bring a speaker to the yard and blast old-school hip-hop. The boys danced, freestyle rapped, and created a ritual out of it. They called it cleansing the air. It wasn't about partying. It was about letting go of the emotional residue that clung to them after a hard take. And there were plenty of hard takes. One of the most intense scenes in the film is when Junior, played by Tace, finds out about his brother's death. The scene was scheduled for late afternoon, golden hour, with a steady cam following Junior across the field. The blocking was simple. But when the cameras rolled, Tace didn't follow the blocking. He stood still. The lines caught in his throat. His hands began to shake. And then out of nowhere, he dropped to his knees and screamed. It wasn't in the script. The crew froze. The director didn't yell cut. The camera operator, by instinct, kept filming. When the scene ended, Tace stood up, nodded once, and walked off set. Nobody spoke for a long time. Later, Tace explained that in that moment, he wasn't acting. He was thinking about his cousin, who had been shot 2 years before. Junior's grief was my grief, he said. And I needed to feel it fully. Scenes like that demanded a kind of emotional bandwidth that most productions don't ask for. The crew began implementing decompression breaks after tough days. Quiet rooms were set up. Cast members could step away without explanation. The production wasn't just shooting a film. It was protecting a process. There were challenges, too. The most unpredictable? The field itself. The dusty, sun-beaten yard that served as the Mustangs' home turf was authentic, but it was also unforgiving. A sprinkler malfunctioned one morning and flooded half the field. Production was delayed while sandbags and industrial fans were brought in to dry the area. For the next week, the field remained slightly damp, creating a slip hazard. Instead of waiting it out, the actors made it part of the choreography. Tackles became messier. Runs looked more real. One actor joked, "We filmed half those plays like we were running through soup." Then came the weather. Los Angeles doesn't get much rain in the summer, but on one crucial shooting day, the final game of the season, a sudden downpour soaked the set. Production scrambled. Tarps flew. Generators sparked. The stadium location was on loan, and there was no chance to reschedule. The crew looked to Joanou, ready for the call to cancel. He looked at the sky, then at the boys in their soaked jerseys. "We shoot it." What followed was one of the most visually stunning sequences in the entire film. Rain falling as the team huddles. Mud flying as cleats dig into drenched turf. Water clinging to helmets and gloves. The boys looked like warriors. Tired, determined, and more real than any perfect sunset ever could have made them. And that's what Gridiron Gang was real. Even in the edit bay, the film retained that pulse. Joanou fought to keep scenes that others might have trimmed. Moments of silence. Looks exchanged. Scenes where no one speaks, but everything is said. In one post-production screening, the studio asked if the film could move faster. "This isn't about speed," Joanou said. "It's about weight." Sound design, too, plays an essential role in shaping the atmosphere. One of the most striking choices made by the filmmakers was to emphasize ambient sound over score in several pivotal scenes. Inside the detention center, every creak, footstep, and buzzer is heightened. The clang of a cell door. The sharp bark of a guard. The soundscape is deliberately oppressive. It keeps the audience on edge. There's no escape, not even in the sound. But outside, on the field, the sound opens up. Wind. Breathing. The crunch of cleats. These aren't just audio details, they're emotional cues. They signal to the viewer that the rules have changed. That this is a space where something different is possible. When music does arrive, it's used sparingly and with precision. The score by Trevor Rabin avoids melodrama. It's subtle, often layering beneath dialogue, or rising just before a key moment, never overwhelming it. One of the most effective techniques used in scoring was restraint. Rabin and Joanou understood that silence, when used correctly, can be louder than any orchestration. In several scenes, particularly after a loss or an emotional confrontation, the music disappears entirely. The absence becomes a presence, a reminder of just how fragile progress is in a place like Kilpatrick. Editing is another cornerstone of the film's emotional rhythm. The pacing of Gridiron Gang reflects the journey of its characters. In the early stages, scenes cut quickly, almost jarringly. There's little time to breathe, to reflect. Conversations are clipped. Emotions simmer just below the surface. But as the story unfolds, the editing slows. Takes linger longer. Scenes are allowed to breathe. The audience is given space to feel what the characters are feeling. Particularly during the game sequences, the editing shifts into another gear. These moments aren't cut like typical sports movies, with fast-paced montages or music-driven highlight reels. Instead, Joanou focuses on the grit of the game. The scrambles, the missed blocks, the grunts and gasps of boys pushing themselves to the edge. And then suddenly, he'll slow everything down, not for style, but for soul. A moment of eye contact between teammates. A deep inhale before a critical snap. A single pass hanging in the air, just a second longer than expected. These editorial choices aren't flashy. They're emotional. They reflect what's at stake. Not just the game, but the growth. One of the film's most moving sequences is the locker room after the team's first loss. The editing holds, uncomfortably long, on the boys as they sit in silence. No words. No score. Just exhaustion. And it's in that stillness that we see what the film does best. It honors the truth of failure. It doesn't rush to redemption. It lets the characters hurt. And by letting them hurt, it makes their eventual resilience all the more powerful. Of course, one cannot talk about filmmaking techniques without acknowledging the performances and how they were captured. Joanou gave his actors room to breathe, often encouraging improvisation in emotionally charged scenes. Dwayne Johnson, portraying Sean Porter, delivers one of the most grounded performances of his career. The camera stays close on him in key moments, tight frames that capture every flicker of doubt, every beat of hope, every loss he carries like a bruise under the surface. The intimacy of these shots, paired with naturalistic lighting and a minimal score, allows us to see not just the coach, but the man. Flawed, exhausted, determined. Box office expectations for Gridiron Gang were modest at best. It wasn't a franchise vehicle. It didn't come with a built-in audience. It was a drama in a market dominated by spectacle. And yet, when it opened, something surprising happened. It found its audience. Word of mouth spread fast. Audiences didn't just like the film. They felt it. Screenings ended in silence. In applause. In conversation. Families brought their sons. Coaches brought their teams. Teachers brought their students. The film wasn't an escape. It was a mirror. The emotional impact translated into solid numbers. In its opening weekend, Gridiron Gang pulled in over $14 million, outperforming early projections. But more impressively, it held steady. Weekend after weekend, it didn't drop off the way many releases do. It stayed. Audiences returned. New ones came. It found legs, powered not by marketing, but by connection. Critically, the response was mixed to positive. But even those who didn't fall for the formula acknowledged the craft. Reviewers pointed to the direction, the restraint, the refusal to lean into sentimentality. Roger Ebert, known for his blunt honesty, highlighted the way the film avoided easy triumph and praised its emotional sincerity. Others noted the unpolished grit of the football scenes, the quiet power of Dwayne Johnson's performance, the smart use of silence, and as time passed, the film found a second life beyond the box office. It was used in classrooms, in juvenile centers, in coaching programs. It became more than a film. It became a tool. A story not about winning, but about trying. And every technical choice, from lighting to lens to the cut of silence after a failed play, was part of that message. That the struggle matters. That the attempt means something. That growth, real growth, is messy, awkward, and sometimes invisible until long after it's happened. In the end, Gridiron Gang isn't just a movie with solid filmmaking. It's a testament to what happens when filmmaking serves the story. When every frame is built not for spectacle, but for truth. When the camera doesn't chase the moment, but honors it. And that's what makes it linger. Long after the lights come up. Long after the credits roll. Long after the final whistle is blown. There's something magnetic about watching a film where you can feel the weight behind every word spoken, where the actors don't just perform their roles. They embody them, as though the story is flowing from a place much deeper than a script. Gridiron Gang is one of those rare films. And much of that emotional power comes not just from the story it tells, but from the people chosen to bring it to life. The cast of Gridiron Gang, both seasoned and emerging, brought a heartbeat to the screen that echoed with sincerity. And when the cameras stopped rolling, their interviews and reflections offered a glimpse into just how deeply this project had affected them, and those who watched. Dwayne Johnson stood at the center of it all. At the time, he was still navigating the bridge between his wrestling legacy and his aspirations as a serious actor. Known for charisma, charm, and explosive physicality, Johnson had never taken on a role quite like Sean Porter. This wasn't a character built on power or bravado. Porter was a man struggling with the weight of failure, of loss, of responsibility. A man not trying to save the world, but to save a handful of kids from the world that had already tried to bury them. And Johnson understood that the challenge here wasn't physical. It was emotional. In interviews, Johnson spoke about his initial conversations with the real Sean Porter. He didn't give me a speech, he recalled. He didn't try to impress me. He told me about the kids. The ones he lost. The ones who made it. And the way he talked about them, it stuck with me. Like every one of them still lived in his chest. That conversation set the tone for how Johnson approached the role. He didn't want to portray a savior. He wanted to portray a man on the edge, desperate to make a difference before it was too late. His co-star, Xzibit, known more for his music than for dramatic acting at the time, played Malcolm Moore, the steady, soft-spoken assistant coach who balanced Sean's fire with quiet resolve. And while his performance came with less screen time, it left a powerful mark. Xzibit later admitted that the role surprised even him. When I read the script, I thought, okay, I'm here to be the sidekick. But once we started filming, I realized Malcolm is the anchor. He's the one who sees what Sean can't always admit. That these boys don't need heroes. They need someone who stays. Off camera, Johnson and Xzibit formed a close friendship, their chemistry carrying over from the locker room scenes to real life. They shared meals between takes, ran lines with the younger cast, and often found themselves staying late after shooting to reflect on what had just been filmed. There were days, Johnson said, where we couldn't just walk off set and go back to trailers. We had to sit in it, talk through it, because the weight of it all, it didn't lift just because the director yelled cut. But it was the younger cast, the boys playing the Mustangs, who carried the film's emotional core. Many were newcomers, or actors still on the cusp of discovery. Jade Yorker, who played Willie Weathers, became the soul of the story. Willie was the quiet one, the kid with a storm behind his eyes and guilt tucked into every breath. Yorker didn't play Willie, he channeled him. His performance, raw and stripped of pretense, struck audiences like a silent punch. In his interviews, Yorker revealed how closely he related to the character. I knew kids like Willie, he said. I was close to being him. A different decision here or there, and I could have ended up in a place like Kilpatrick. To prepare for the role, Yorker visited juvenile centers. He listened to stories, asked questions, took notes, but mostly he just watched. I paid attention to how the boys carried themselves, he said. They're guarded, but underneath all that armor, they're just kids trying to survive. So to Tace, who portrayed Junior Paleta, was equally impactful. Towering and physically imposing, Junior's presence was unmissable. But Tace, with a natural empathy in his eyes, turned that physicality into vulnerability. His breakdown after hearing of his brother's death became one of the most heartbreaking moments in the film. That scene wasn't acting, Tace later admitted. I thought about my own family, about the things I've been afraid to say, and I just let it go. Many of the actors bonded deeply during filming. They trained together, played football together, slept in the same quarters for scenes set inside Kilpatrick. And in those days, something shifted. They stopped seeing each other as co-workers and started seeing each other as teammates. That camaraderie bleeds through the screen. Every high five, every tackle, every sideline huddle feels lived in because it was. Between takes they laughed, played real games, gave each other nicknames. shared stories from their own lives that mirrored the characters they were portraying. Director Joanou encouraged this closeness. He often held informal discussions with the cast before intense scenes. No rehearsal. No blocking. Just everyone sitting in a circle, talking about what the moment meant. Not for the character, but for them. Phil made us feel like we were part of something bigger than a movie, Yorker said. He made it personal. And for the audience it was. When the film premiered, the response was swift and emotional. People didn't leave theaters talking about the plot. They talked about how they felt. Parents brought their teenage sons. Coaches brought their teams. Teachers used it in classrooms. It became more than a movie. It became a conversation. Online forums lit up with viewers sharing their own stories. One former inmate wrote, "I saw myself in Willie. In Junior. In all of them. This film didn't just tell a story. It reminded me I still had one." Another audience member shared, "My son and I haven't talked in weeks. After the movie, we sat in the parking lot and cried. Then we talked. For hours." Critics, too, took note. While some acknowledged the film's adherence to familiar sports drama tropes, many praised its authenticity, its restraint, and the sincerity of the performances. Roger Ebert called it a film that doesn't try to impress, it tries to connect. Entertainment outlets lauded Johnson's transition into more grounded dramatic territory, calling it one of his most layered performances to date.